Fear, worry, and anxiety. That is what East Palestine residents have been feeling since that Norfolk Southern train went off the tracks 3 weeks ago in Ohio, causing one of the worst environmental disasters we have seen in a while. Right now, we are waiting for a briefing from federal, state, and local leaders in East Palestine, and it's set to begin at any moment. We will bring you any updates we learn from it as they happen. Now, today, residents in East Palestine, they woke up to the news that some of their concerns about the long-term safety of the air they're breathing may be valid. That's right. Researchers at Texas A&M took a closer look at EPA findings in East Palestine and say there are 9 different pollutants in the air at high enough levels to pose long-term respiratory problems. And the EPA says those toxic pollutants will go away on their own, likely, but as the Ohio Department of Natural Resources announced 45,000 aquatic animals have already been killed by toxins in the water, many residents who live near the derailment say they aren't happy with what they are hearing or seeing from the EPA.
We're 3 weeks in. They should have had dirt testing immediately. And they should have been telling all these families how to clean their houses or stay away. Why didn't FEMA come in and set up houses for all these families?
House Republicans have launched an investigation of their own, but not into how the derailment happened or what the railroad is doing to clean it up, but into Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. In a letter to Secretary Buttigieg, the House Oversight Committee wrote, "Despite the Department of Transportation's responsibility to ensure safe and reliable transport in the United States, you ignored the catastrophe for over a week." Which, folks, we know is not true. Based on a timeline provided by a White House official, multiple federal teams were actually on the ground within hours of the derailment. Now, the committee's letter also asked the Department of Transportation to hand over documents related to the National Transportation Safety Board investigation. But to be clear, the NTSB is an independent federal agency, meaning they are entirely separate from the Department of Transportation. You're going to hear my interview with Secretary Buttigieg in just a minute, but he responded to the letter on Twitter, and he said this: "I'm alarmed to learn that the chair of the House Oversight Committee thinks that the NTSB is a part of our department. NTSB is an independent, and with good reason. Still, of course, we will fully review this and respond appropriately." Meanwhile, the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, that is in fact responsible for, as its name indicates, national transportation safety, released an initial report on what it's found out about the derailment. Now, there are lots of questions that remain, but one thing is clear from the preliminary report: the incident was preventable. I had the chance to talk to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg about the derailment after his visit to East Palestine, and I started by asking him what he told President Biden when he briefed him after returning. Take a listen.
The president's taken a personal interest in this situation from early on, and I wanted to make sure he knew about what I saw on the ground, both in terms of the administration response, and that's something that has been really well coordinated in terms of how DOT personnel, the National Transportation Safety Board, EPA, and others, many of whom were on the ground from the first hours of this situation, have all been coordinating both with each other and with state and local authorities. I also wanted him to know about what I saw in the residents of East Palestine, people whose lives have been upended through no fault of their own, who have just shown remarkable resilience and are asking to make sure they'll be taken care of. There has been so much information and, frankly, so much misinformation thrown at this community and thrown at this situation that a lot of them are asking who they can even trust. And it's so important to continue to make sure that they can get good, accurate information about the things they care about most, which isn't national politics or who looks good or who looks bad. It's continuing to know that their air, water, and soil are going to be safe, that their homes are going to be safe. That's what anybody would want to know in this situation. You could feel a sense of fatigue with all of the kind of politics swirling around their community. They just want to know they'll be taken care of, which is exactly what the president and the administration is working to make sure of.
Oftentimes, I have been in a number of these meetings with the president. He will direct individuals with whom he's meeting with to do something after they have briefed him. Did the president direct you all to take any further action?
Yeah, he's looking for us to make sure that we are doing everything in our power to support these residents, to communicate with these residents, and that means different things across the different agencies. EPA's focus is on making sure Norfolk Southern cleans up and making sure people get the test results and the support that they need. Public health officials have their role. Where our department comes in really is transportation policy, making sure that in this moment, with so much focus on what happened with this derailment, that we are acting both to hold Norfolk Southern accountable and to make sure that we do more to prevent all derailments. We've been working from the day this administration arrived to raise the bar on rail safety regulation, especially because it got watered down quite a bit under the previous administration. Also calling on Congress to take steps, common sense steps like increasing the cap on the fines that we can use to hold railroads accountable for any safety violations, making sure that we have a freer hand for imposing the right kind of safety promoting rules on things like braking systems and the way hazardous materials are handled.
You know, Mr. Secretary, you talk about the regulations, but I want to note that the NTSB chair, Jennifer Homendy, she indicated that one of the rules mandating faster brakes on some trains would actually not have prevented this particular derailment. I think that harkens back to 2017. So has enough cause been determined for you to now consider policy changes? Do you know enough now? And if so, what are some of those policy changes?
Yeah, this is a really important distinction, and I want to make sure I emphasize this. NTSB is still doing its analysis on what caused this particular derailment, and we're going to learn more. They did their fact-finding release that Thursday that I was in town, but it may be a year or more before the final analysis is in. But what I'm saying is that even as we wait to see that final analysis, we know that some of these policies are a good idea. The old 2015 version of the braking rule would not have applied to this type of train. But it's still a good rule, and I think we still need to find ways to strengthen rules around braking. We don't know yet whether some of the other regulations or safety procedures that got watered down before would have applied in this particular scenario, but we already know that they are the right thing to do. So yes, of course, when that NTSB report is released in a year or however long it takes them, I'm sure there will be more lessons that we can apply in a very specific and technical way.
What exactly can Congress do to ensure that railroad corporations are not able to skirt safety regulations just because it costs more? Is there a specific bill?
Yeah, look, the railroad companies have been very effective in pushing back and getting their way in Congress. But I think right now is a time when Congress could step up. Some of the very same people who have been quick to get on Twitter or quick to get on TV could be quick to get on a bill that would make a difference. Let me mention some specific things Congress could do. I already mentioned raising the cap on the fines. I think that would make a big difference. Another thing that I think would help would be to accelerate the adoption of stronger tank cars. Again, I'm going to be careful to say that I'm not making any statement that has to come from NTSB about what applied in this situation. But what we know is that there's a stronger standard of tank car for many hazardous materials. Under the Obama administration, a rule said it was supposed to be fully adopted by 2025. That got watered down, pushed back to 2029. I think we can move that timeline back up, but we're going to need help from Congress in order to do it.
Do you think that the NTSB and the Department of Transportation should be working more closely together?
Well, just to be clear, I think that the NTSB is doing a fantastic job, and the system in terms of our folks on the ground supporting the NTSB while doing our own work, I think that's worked well. There's certainly been great cooperation in this case. What I am rethinking, though, is whether there are ways to still be more engaged and on the scene while supporting their independence, still being able to show support for residents.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good to be with you.